Welcome to this explainer. All right, today we're heading out to the high desert of New Mexico, specifically down a 65-mile stretch of road known as the Turquoise Trail. And on the surface, it looks like your typical beautiful juniper-studded landscape, but hidden right there in these hills is a literal 1,000-year saga. We're talking boom, bust, and honestly, some of the most resilient people on Earth.
So to really wrap our heads around how unique this place is, we kind of have to start with a weird question. What exactly does a red-nosed yak have to do with America's oldest mining district? Well, if you ever find yourself in the tiny town of Madrid, New Mexico in December, you are going to find out. See, for about 8 minutes every year, the main two-lane highway gets completely taken over by this ragtag Christmas parade. We're talking hippie trailers, old buses, the whole shebang. And the speed of that entire parade, it's dictated, literally, by a red-nosed yak. If the act feels like walking fast, the parade's fast. If the act is slow, the parade crawls. It is just the perfect introduction to the quirky, completely offbeat reality of modern-day Madrid.
And that parade, it brilliantly illustrates the vibe of the roughly 300 residents who live there today. They actually call themselves Madroids, and yeah, the emphasis is heavily on the mad. One local resident, who literally goes by the name Santa Claus, put it best. Yeah, well, of course we're a tourist town, or as they say, we're a drinking town with a tourist problem. Today, Madrid is this funky little oasis of artists, off-the-grid outlaws, and quirky boutiques. But it really begs the question, right? How on earth did this eccentric community end up here, right smack in the middle of a rugged desert? Section 1. America's oldest mining district. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the Madroids, we have to peel back the layers of this landscape over 1,000 years, way before the art galleries and the quirky parades even existed. This timeline is absolutely crucial because it completely busts the historical myth that there wasn't any Spanish mining in New Mexico prior to 1725. The Cerillos mining district is actually the oldest mining district in the United States, and the progression here is just fascinating. As early as 700 AD, Native American Pueblo peoples were mining turquoise here. This sky stone was so prized, it was actually traded as far away as Mayan ruins down in Honduras. By 1300 AD, they'd moved on to mining lead to create metallic glazes for their pottery. Then, jump to 1581, Spanish explorers arrived and started prospecting those exact same hills. And by 1695, the Spanish had officially established Real de los Cerrillos, making it the oldest official mining community in U.S. history. Now, the Spanish were mostly hunting for silver, and to find it, they relied on a pretty wild geological process called supergene enrichment. Essentially, in a vertical ore vein, oxygen and descending rainwater oxidizes the sulfide ore over millions of years. This frees up the silver, which gets carried downward until it hits the water table. And boom, that's where it precipitates out into this highly concentrated, super-rich zone of silver. The Spanish miners totally figured this out. In fact, when American explorers in the 1800s stumbled upon these ancient Spanish mine shafts, they realized the Spanish had dug down to exactly 110 feet. They dug precisely to that water table, extracted all that naturally enriched silver, and then just stopped.
Section 2. The Great Mining Booms. So, with those shallow silver deposits tapped out, the area went pretty quiet for a long time. But then, the American territorial period brought the Industrial Revolution straight to the desert, and that sparked our next incredible chapter.
The year 1879 completely changed the game. The railroad was coming, and prospectors just flooded the Cerrillos Hills. We're talking over 1,000 mining claims filed almost overnight. 10 camps practically exploded into rowdy, Wild West boomtowns. The town of Cerillos alone boasted 4 hotels and an absolutely staggering 21 saloons. But here's the twist. While everyone originally came chasing gold and silver, the real treasure, the stuff that would power the railroad and eventually build the entire town of Madrid, was coal. 200,000. That is the staggering amount of coal, in tons, that the Madrid mine was churning out every single year at its absolute peak in the 1930s. To put that into perspective, it's a massive, massive operation. The Albuquerque and Cerillos Coal Company essentially willed the town of Madrid into existence. It grew to house up to 3,000 people. And what's really unique here is that unlike a lot of those gritty, solitary mining camps you hear about, Madrid was a real family town, completely full of children.
Section 3. A luminous ghost town. Now, because it was a company town fueled by literally tons of cheap coal, Madrid had abundant access to electricity, and that led to a spectacular and eventually tragic phase of its history.
The contrast here is just staggering. Back in the 1930s, Madrid didn't just celebrate Christmas, they completely electrified it. The miners built this jaw-dropping Christmas wonderland that drew up to 100,000 visitors. You guys, it was so incredibly bright that TWA commercial airlines literally rerouted their flights just so passengers could look down at the Madrid lights. No way, right? But then came World War II. The miners left to go fight, and when they finally returned, the whole world had changed. Natural gas was the new big thing, coal demand just completely plummeted, and the jobs vanished. Madrid was abandoned so fast, it was honestly eerie. People just packed whatever fit in their cars and left. They literally left silverware and dishes sitting right on their kitchen tables. And those world-famous Christmas lights, they went totally dark.
Section 4. Rebirth of the Madroids. Let's move to the 1970s and see how this builds. For a couple of decades, Madrid was a literal ghost town. But then, the abandoned company homes were suddenly put up for rent and sale at dirt-cheap prices.
Now, this incredibly cheap real estate attracted a very specific kind of demographic, people who were actually willing to endure a pretty harsh reality. These homes relied on outhouses, the drinking water smelled heavily like sulfur from the honeycombed coal mines down below, and lingering, floating coal dust just dirtied your clothes instantly. Oh, and absolutely zero cell service. But you know what? To the bikers, the artists, the hippies, and the Vietnam War veterans who moved in, this gritty, off-the-grid reality was absolute paradise. It was cheap housing, sure, but more importantly, it was absolute, unbothered freedom.
There's this great quote from a resident named Les Reasonover that I think perfectly captures the spirit of the town. He said, "That's what I like about Madroids. We're all here because we're not all there." You've got residents like Pistol Pete, an elderly ex-stage designer who proudly declares he's going to die in his dirt floor cabin rather than ever set foot in a hospital. But beneath all this fierce, outlaw independence is this beautiful, undeniable interdependence. For example, when a famously grumpy, somewhat unlikable drifter in the town passed away, the community flat out refused to let the county toss him in an unmarked grave. They spent days hacking a grave out of the rocky mesa with pickaxes. They built him a custom coffin, painted his portrait on the lid, and buried him themselves in their own DIY cemetery. Because, hey, even if they didn't really like him, he was still a Madroid.
Section 5. Preserving a layered heritage. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and Santa Fe County was facing a massive engineering challenge. How exactly do you protect the general public from 67 dangerous, wide-open mine shafts without taking a bulldozer to this sacred 1,000-year-old landscape?
Well, the New Mexico Abandoned Mineland Bureau came up with a genuinely brilliant set of solutions, completely avoiding the heavy machinery that would have ruined the area. First, they used polyurethane foam plugs inside the shafts. This let them keep the historic rock waste piles perfectly intact on the surface, exactly how the ancient miners left them. It's like a giant puzzle they solved perfectly. Second, for the shafts right near hiking trails, they installed Teco mesh. This is this high-tensile steel mesh, anchored deep down into the bedrock, and it's virtually uncuttable. It literally lets hikers stand safely right over the void and look hundreds of feet down into history. And finally, for shafts that contain vital bat habitats, they build cupolas out of weathering steel. This specific steel naturally rusts to a brown color, perfectly blending into the desert dirt, protecting the bats while keeping that historic viewshed totally untouched.
And that brings us to our final takeaway. From the ancient Puebloans pulling turquoise skystones out of the earth, to the Spanish hunting for supergene silver, to the coal miners powering a literal Christmas wonderland, right up to the fiercely independent Madroids living there today, the landscape constantly changes, but the human drive to carve out a community against all odds, that remains. The Turquoise Trail is a true phoenix, constantly burning down and rising from its own ashes. It really makes you wonder, if you look just past the surface, what incredible layered history might be hiding right in your own backyard. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and hey, keep exploring.